Hi there, I'm David Baker, and I hope you're in for a little bit longer video than usual this time. I'm going to wrap up our series on the undead. We'll come back to some undead here and there, but I want to move on and forward to newer things. So we've been talking about it for a while, vampires. And specifically, we're going to talk about Western vampires. Now, there are distinctions between Western and Eastern vampires, namely invisibility and some other things. But the Western vampire is what most of you will be familiar with, and it's what we'll be talking about. It is your idea of Lord Strahd from the Ravenloft setting. It is Sorin from the Innistrad setting of magic. It is Dracula from Bram Stoker's Dracula. So it's this idea of kind of a posh, uppity, high society, noble villain. And that's, I think, where the vampires are best used. So let's go ahead and break down what a vampire is. Now, of all the chaotic evil undead that stalk the world, vampires are considered to be probably one of the big three big bad evils. The other two, and they're the one that I'm going to use to culminate this. The other two I'll briefly touch on would be liches and mummies, greater mummies to be specific. But vampires are more usable in a typical campaign setting than a lich or a mummy, which is why we're going to talk about vampires, because the whole idea of the series is that it gives you ideas of things to use. So these guys, they move silently through the night. They prey upon the living without mercy or compassion. They rest at night in their coffins. They wear fine clothing. They're smooth talkers. There's a lot that we think about vampires that holds true for D&D vampires. The big thing to remember, and this was something that I found was very neat as a D&D player, they don't just return to their coffins at night. They can, or their night, which is daylight, sorry. They can pass time in their coffin anytime they choose. The reason why they return to their coffin, and they need it, is because inside their coffin, a lot of them will have the dirt from their homeland, which a vampire can only rest on the dirt from its homeland. Now, some canny adventurers may take this and use this information, and it can be very, very helpful in dealing with vampires. They cast no reflection in glass, they cast no shadows, and they move in complete silence. They can walk amongst the living pretty much unaccounted for, and that's what makes them truly terrifying. The only signs that I've given you are the only way to detect a vampire for the normal observer. So I'm going to move right into combat with these guys, because there's a lot to go through. They have a lot of abilities, a lot of powers, and it might vary between edition. I am running off 2nd edition, but it's moldable to any edition. Your edition's monster manual will kind of run you through what they do, but these are pretty much universal. First things first, they have a very high strength. They hit very hard. A lot of times they'll have damage bonuses to hit bonuses, and they hit like a truck. They are very, very strong and powerful. The second thing, and this is probably one of the most scary things about the vampire, is that they have ability to charm people. And this is as a charm person spell. So what they do is, it's by gaze. So eyesight. So if you make eye contact with a vampire, they can try to charm you just with their eyesight. And it's very powerful, and in a lot of editions, you'll actually take negatives on your saving throws, or it'll be harder to save. It'll be a higher DC. That's one of the biggest things about them. Higher level vampires and older vampires, that's how you get a higher level vampire, is an older vampire. When you get to a certain age categories, they can actually do it with just their voice. And at the highest age category of vampires, they're even able to do it by will, by thought, to charm you, which is a very scary concept. And you can use vampires as a end game boss. But I'll keep going in combat here. They have a strong tie to the negative energy plane. Now, a couple videos ago, we talked about wights and how when they hit you, because of their connection to this mystical dark realm, essentially, they can drain levels off of your characters. Now, vampires are even stronger, have an even stronger attenuation to that plane. So if they hit you, they'll deal 2 damage per hit. However, if they hit you with a sword or some weapon that they may be using, it doesn't apply the level drain. It's only with their claws and bite. So that's something important to keep in mind. And kind of typical among these undead, if you are killed by a vampire's level drain, you become a vampire yourself. After you're buried and a few days pass, you'll kind of come up. Vampire hunters will a lot of times burn the bodies of those who were slain by a vampire so that they don't resurrect. It's also a way that a vampire may make sure that they can permanently kill somebody. So that's something to keep in mind as a DM. If you want to use that or not, it is very, very powerful. The next thing is that they're like all undead. They're not affected by mind-affecting spells. However, we take it a step further now. They are immune to all poisons, and they're immune to paralysis, which means any hold person, anything like that, even if there's a spell paralysis, even that won't work on them. They're completely immune. Cold damage does damage them, but it does half. Usually undead are immune to it, but cold damage does half. Electrical damage also does half. So if your wizard has a big lightning bolt spell, you might learn pretty quick it's not going to deal that much damage. Now they have a few ways to escape from combat, as they are immortal, they're very crafty, they value their life more than just fighting a group of adventurers to death. And that's something to keep in mind as well when using vampires. They're not just there randomly to fight somebody to the death. They're not a random monster. You don't use them like that. They are very cold and calculating. So the methods of escape that they have the ability to shape change into a large bat. Who would have guessed it? They also have this ability to go into a gaseous form, which literally means they like evaporate into the air, into like a purple cloud or whatever color your vampires evaporate into, and they can just float through the air. And they are completely incorporeal, which means they can't be hit, they can't be touched. If you do have a bellows, I've had players before suck a vampire gas up into a bellows that they had. It was a pretty far-fetched idea, but it was cool and I liked it, so they had a vampire trapped in these billows. The last one that they have is they have the ability to spider climb. And now this usually isn't meant as an escape because they have better forms of it, but the spider climb is literally, think like Spider-Man. They can put their fingers on a wall and just walk up a wall if they want to. And the biggest thing about this is crafty vampires will do this to get to their lairs. There will be no normal means that people would see it because they can climb to it. So that's something to keep in mind. The last big thing that they have for combat is they have the ability to summon animals to help them in combat. If they're underground, they could summon anywhere from 10 to 100 rats. And the rats typically don't attack, but they do like get on people and get in the way and can cause some negatives to hit and things like that. If they're out in the wilderness or above ground, typically, if they're available, wolves, 3 to 18 wolves typically. And it's just the ability that they have. It's something that they can basically mass suggest or mass control and pull these to them. And now weakness. Now there's all sorts of crazy weaknesses that people come up with through the vampire literature that's proliferated throughout the years. In D&D, it's 3 things. You can kill a vampire. Well, we'll talk about a couple of weaknesses, essentially. First things first, garlic. They do not like garlic. It will ward them off, and it will cause them to lose focus in fights. If you pull out a bundle of garlic or put it around your doorway, they're not gonna come in. Plain and simple. It's that easy. They do not like garlic. Now, if your party members are walking around with garlic all the time around them, people aren't going to like them very much either because they smell like garlic all the time. Unless maybe they're from Italy. So, the other thing that will cause them to like recoil, and this won't really ward them off, but it will definitely, and that's a lawful good holy symbol. But I like to take this one step further. I like to do it only if it is wielded by someone of true faith. So, for example, if you're a lawful good paladin of Bahamut, we'll say, lawful good dragon god, if he wields his holy symbol with vigor and zeal and righteousness, and we know he believes in it, he's a paladin, right? That's going to cause a vampire to it's like a radiance. This idea of this radiance that comes off of it that just kind of almost like when you hear a loud bang or something, it'll catch you like that. And that's what happens to the vampires. And then holy water will cause damage to them as per normal undead. Usually, depending upon edition, it's 1 to 8 damage per vial. And, I don't know who carries around vials of holy water, but it's something that's always been in the rules, so. Now, to kill a vampire, there's only 3 ways. That's it. 3 ways. 1. Easiest way, sunlight. Leave them in sunlight for a minute, they're dead. Straight up, gone, no questions asked. Incinerated. Sunlight for a minute, pow, done. A little bit more tricky. Running water. If they're in running water, 3 rounds, which is 3 minutes. Depending upon edition, it could be longer, shorter, but usually it's 3 combat rounds. They lose 1/3 of their health per combat round that they're in water. And now this isn't just like one toe in the water. They are in running water. And I don't mean a faucet. I mean a river. A waterfall. Even a stream could work. But it has to be immersible water that moves of its own free will, essentially speaking. Important stuff. Now, the last one, and the one that if your characters are vampire hunters is probably the most common way, is a stake through the heart. Now, the stake through the heart is kind of a common misconception for most people. It is a wooden stake driven right through the heart. Simple. That's what most people get. Oh, it's dead. However, it's not dead. When you stake a vampire in the heart, you place them in a stasis, which is a suspended animation. If I had 4 vampires on the wall right behind me, all in their coffins with a stake in their heart, and I walk by and I pull one of those stakes out and the other one out and the other one out and the other one out, I have not 4 dead vampires, I have 4 living, breathing, about to bite my neck open vampires. You pull that stake out, vampire's back. Just like that. So that's something very important to keep in mind. And they will stay preserved as long as that stake is in their heart. So how do you kill them with a stake through the heart? Because we know it can be done. Movies do it all the time. Some movies get it right. It's a stake through the heart, and this is kind of gruesome. But you cut off the head, and then you either leave the parts in sunlight, because sunlight will do it, or if you can't get into the sunlight for whatever reason, you fill the mouth with garlic, or put a holy symbol of a lawful good god in the mouth, close it, with the head severed, and then if the stake comes out, nothing happens. They just stay like they are. So that's one way to kind of permanently neuter a vampire, But the only two ways to kill, there's three ways with the, we call it killing them, but really there's two ways, and that's the running water and the sunlight. The stake through the heart and the cutting off the head, it's gruesome, and it's what most people will do, but it's not the best way. That's what I'm trying to say. So as a DM, if they didn't kill it by sunlight or running water, or do the garlic in the mouth thing, there's a way that it can come back. And that's very important, because vampires are going to be something that we haven't talked about yet. And that is, I'm going to kind of roll this into another idea here. And the vampire is a big bad evil guy. It can be a big bad evil guy. You can use them as minions or something like that, but a real high level ancient vampire is a big bad evil guy. They are not just some random encounter. And it's very important as a DM that you do not use monsters that are meant to be bosses, essentially, in the terms of video games and things like that, or the BBEG, the big bad evil guy, is what we use in D&D terms. And the idea is that this vampire has some higher end game goals. And I'm moving away from combat now. I want to move into their society and how they think. Now, they are the pinnacle picture of a big bad evil guy. A lot of times they live in a big castle with cemeteries, morbid, lightning striking down, tragedy all around, big mausoleums and crypts, often maybe off the site of a major battlefield they built their castle and stuff like that. They will all feel somewhat attachment to places with morbid significance, like the grave of a suicide or the site of a murder. So your lower level vampires, your younger vampires, will a lot of times be attracted to these places where the older vampires will have a whole castle and graveyard and all this stuff. It's very flamboyant, which is, you want to paint the picture to your players that, hey, this is the boss, the big bad evil guy. You want to make sure your players know that when you're using these. Now, normally they're solitary creatures. However, we talked a little bit in combat about how if you are reduced to 0 or less levels from a vampire, you're turned into a vampire. Now, you are completely and utterly under the control of that master vampire. You can freely think and move and act as you will. You can even plot against your master vampire if you want to. And that's the term I'm going to use. I'm going to use master vampire, and I'll call the ones that are made afterwards, I'll call them secondary vampires. So your master vampire has complete control over your secondary vampire. So your secondary vampire can still think on their own, they can still act on their own, do everything on their own. However, that charm person, the eye contact, the whole sound of my voice thing is non-negotiable to secondary vampires. They have to listen to the master vampire. And now, there's no rabbit's foot or anything like that. Or rabbit's paw. Is that what it is? Where you can twist monkey's paw. There we go. There's no way to twist it into whatever you want it to be. There's no genie twisting words. They get the message. They're doing it. So that is something to keep That is something to keep in mind. So when your group of adventurers first encounter vampires, they will not encounter the big bad evil guy. They're going to have to fight their way, claw their way, deal their way through all sorts of undead and other lesser secondary vampires to get to that big bad evil vampire. And by then, guess what? He's probably gone. Because a master vampire is very smart, very intelligent. They will almost never take a fight that they cannot win. In fact, they will never take a fight that they cannot win. It has been known for adventurers to be chasing master vampires, and the master vampire says, whoa, this guy's going to kill me. I can't really deal with him. I'm going to go sleep in a coffin under a mountain for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Whenever he's dead and old, gone. Vampires will do that. Master vampires will do that. They'll just, nope, I don't want this fight. I'll see you in 40 years when you're like 80. Sorry. So keep that in mind. If your vampire gets away, he might not just go back to his place or his house. He might just, all right, no, I'll start over. They're immortal. They have no time frame. So that's another thing too to keep in mind is when they're making their plans, you can go super Machiavellian with their plans because they live forever. Like what we think of, like I'm planning out my week at the beginning of the week. That's it. Like that's a year. That's 10 years to them. So their plans to maybe take over a kingdom or put a family on the throne that won't hunt his children, things like that. Vampires will do that over the course of decades if they have to. And the older they are, the more patient they are as well, because their plans become grander in scheme. You know, they might not like that lich down the road, but guess what? They can't just go and fight that lich down the road. They might put some cog into place. Sorry, here's my camera. They may put some cog into place that involves the adventurers here, and it turns. The adventurers go along with it. Here's a lich. Now the adventurers the whole time think that everything just went that way. But no, it was a vampire. It was the idea of something could just do that. Last but not least, vampires, like all other undead, have no place in this world. They're not of this world. They're not living creatures. They exist only to bring evil and chaos. Almost without exception, they are feared by those who dwell in the regions in which it makes its home. They cause animals to be uneasy. And they sustain themselves by draining the life forces from living creatures. They are not nice. They are very, very powerful. If you do choose to use these in your campaign as a DM, make sure you don't dial it back. They're meant to be powerful, but just make sure that your players, through their adventuring, without too much given to them, make sure that they have at least some of the ideas of the tools that they will need and the knowledge that they will need, be it through rumors, things like that. Don't throw a vampire at your 6th, 7th level party because you think they can handle it. Because odds are, if you're playing the vampire right, they won't be able to. That being said, I'm Javen Baker, and this was Vampires. I hope you enjoy. I'll be back next week with some fresh ideas. We'll move on to some lighter creatures, some interesting ones, and then I'll probably be throwing in some DM tips along the way. I talked about it a little bit today about the big bad evil guys and stuff, and I'll throw some of that in as well as the negative energy planes. So expect some more videos, and I'll see you soon.